So a huge good evening to everybody. Thank you for sharing some time. I appreciate being a swimming parent is a constant battle of sleep, juggling and diarising every aspect of your life. So thank you for carving out some time for us this evening. My name is Kevin. I'll be taking us through or co-hosting this presentation with Anna, and we'll give a quick introduction in a second. But we're not going to talk for too long. We want to give as much time for questions as possible. So as we're touching on the subjects that we are going to share shortly, please make sure if you've got any questions or topics you'd like us to expand on, just pop it into the chat box. And as soon as we get through the slides, we will get to all of those. Okay, so quick introduction from me is going to be preceded by this quote up here. So potential is just that. Our actions today impact on a young person achieving their potential in the future. Okay, and I will talk a lot when I do my parent sessions up and down the country in the fact that when you speak to your young people, you are speaking to two people. You are speaking to them today, the young person, the young athlete in front of you, but you're also speaking to their future self. Young people mop up the experiences that they have, the good and the bad, everything that comes with sport and school and life, and they absorb it and it becomes and it forms part of who they are as an adult. So if our young people are showing academic potential, sporting potential, swimming potential in this case, we need to make sure we are nurturing that and understanding that it's not just about where they are now, but where they are going to be in 3 years' time, 5 years' time, 10 years' time, because potential is very much just what it is. It is not a guarantee, and it's certainly not a forecast of what's to come. It's just a waypoint and a stepping stone on this journey that is swimming. So my name's Kev. I've worked in the swimming world now for just over 21 years, or terrifyingly almost 22 actually, in a wide range of roles. But now I'm the development director at AP Race. Annually, I support approximately 10,000 swimming parents. So there isn't a question I don't think that I've never had before. So feel free to throw your best questions at me later on. But prior to that, I was Swim England talent. And prior to that, I was a full-time coach working in the club system. I've worked in colleges, universities, schools, disability programs. I have hopefully seen things from a range of angles, and I try and have as balanced a view as possible. But I'm very much about this journey. It's not something that is a single point in time. It's something that's ongoing. You know, I'm 30 years into racing myself, still compete as a masters swimmer. And this isn't the end point. This is just a stopping point on what hopefully will be a lifelong journey. So for us, I try and get across that it is that zoomed out view. It's looking at them now as a moment in time, but a moment that makes up a much bigger picture. So I'm going to hand it over to my co-host for this evening, Olympic gold medalist Anna Hopkin.
Thanks, Kev. Yeah, so I guess from my perspective, I'm obviously coming at it from an ex-swimmer now, but having spent really 10 years in the sport, going from not an amazing swimmer to joining a university program, to going to America, to starting making teams, and then obviously going on to go to 2 Olympic Games and becoming an Olympic champion. And then now working with AP Race as development ambassador, so working a lot with Kev. We've spent a lot of time, sort of, especially over the summer, doing talks to parents with each other. So that's been quite good to kind of see how Kev operates and the questions that we get asked from parents and putting ourselves in their shoes. So, yeah, I guess I might go into a little bit about my journey as we go through this presentation and kind of maybe some of the difficulties I had when I was younger about balancing life, school, and trying to be a swimmer at the same time, which I'm sure many of you will have some of those struggles. So, but yeah, this year for me, it's been a lot about navigating life after sport and figuring out what I enjoy outside of the pool. And part of that is inspiring the next generation of swimmers, and particularly from a female perspective, improving that environment and experience of the swimmers coming through now.
Thank you very much, Anna. And one thing I would say, although there are very few questions that I haven't heard before, when we were on tour this summer, there was a parent who asked Anna a question that I've never seen a parent ask before. And looking directly into the eyes of an Olympic gold medalist and asking them, what is it that makes you different from every other child out there that aspires to win Olympic gold but hasn't? And we both looked at each other as if to go, I don't think I've ever heard that question asked before. So yeah, fire those questions away. I cannot encourage you enough because it will hopefully really bring to life some of the stories from this session. Right, I'm having a bit of a mare with my mouse, but it looks like it's back on
Yeah, it
track.
was it was throwing me off because it was going all
Sorry
right.
about that. The swimming parent experience, and I say experience, the good and the bad, it is full of ups and downs, it's full of challenges, it's full of wonderful bits, but it starts many years before the swimmer even believes they're going to be a competitive swimmer. You remember taking them down the pool for the first time, taking them into a parent and baby class, taking them along to that stage one lesson, seeing them take their first strokes. And all of that brings you much more into the journey than perhaps other sports, where perhaps you might take them to football at the age of 10, drop them off, and then they just go and do their sport. Whereas swimming is a much earlier integration of parents in terms of that journey. And therefore, it is multifaceted. It comes as something that overspills into so many aspects of their life, as I'm sure you can appreciate. The collateral damage that swimming does to your life outside the pool is almost unlimited. And I'm sure we'll bring some of those stories to life a bit later on. But you're supporting a child, an athlete, a student, potentially a sibling, a friend, and all those other things that young people go through. And therefore it cannot just be purely about sport and sporting performance. Young people are developing in such a multitude of ways. They're going through this journey of the academic changes, certainly as they go from primary and secondary school, but from different sports potentially, and obviously the maturity aspect of growing into a new person. And all of those things are going on whilst we're expecting swimming to carry on in a nice straight line. And as of course we know, that isn't the case for many of them. They are a Rubik's Cube that changes every single day. And what I mean by that, you think you've cracked it, and then next day something's different. Next week there's a new problem. Next month there's a new challenge. Okay. So we are having to be agile. We're having to navigate constantly these changes, and it doesn't stop. And I'm sure Anna and Adam and other athletes that we work with will allude to this. Even as a senior athlete, you still lean on your parents, but you just lean on them in different ways as you go through the journey. And one thing I'd always say to parents is your child is a case study of one. I can talk to you about trends, I can talk to you about guidance and frameworks and patterns, but ultimately, how you choose to support your child and the interactions you have with them and the journey at different touch points that they go on is going to be unique to them. So just bear that in mind and try not to get too sucked into, oh, well, that athlete's doing this. Why aren't we doing this? Okay, because ultimately, they are all growing and developing in different ways.
Yeah, and I think that kind of leads me on to this next point about no two paths are the same. Like Heather said, your child is a case study of one. So there isn't, unfortunately, a exact path that if every single followed, they would, pop out an Olympian or Olympic medalist. And I'll share a little bit about my younger journey and kind of my journey into elite because I think it kind of paints this picture exactly. But I was quite a good swimmer when I was sort of 10, 11, had quite a lot of potential and was kind of funneled into that pathway of, more training, more intensity, better pools, more coaches. Um, and it became very, very intense very early on. And from a parent's point of view, my mum and dad were just ferrying me up and down various motorways to different pools at crazy hours of the morning, eating dinner in the car, eating breakfast in the car, um, all of that. And it definitely had a big impact on family life. You know, I have an older brother. He had to just kind of navigate that with the family. But ultimately, I decided to leave that environment at 13, move back to just a little club, train twice a week, and didn't really ever think I'd get back into the elite side of sport again at that point. Um, Took about 4 years for me to kind of build up I was doing loads of other sports, but then had a coach that kind of encouraged me to get into the competitive side of the sport again and went on to university, built up my training, just focused on the 50 freestyle, gradually built into the 100 freestyle, and then, just started making teams and progressing from there. So that is mainly just to reiterate the point that I think if you looked at that as a journey, you would never think that that person is going to make an Olympic team or win an Olympic medal. But the way I went about my journey was just different to other people. And it just shows that there isn't just one way to get to a destination. And there's probably going to be points where your kids hate the sport or your kids love the sport or they want to do other sports, and it can be quite confusing to know what what do they actually want to do, what do they actually enjoy. And sometimes it's just as parents just trying to help them navigate that path and just being there to support them. I think if you ask my mum, she'd probably say that was all she could do. She could just try and understand what I was going through and just try and help navigate and support that with me. And this point around comparison, I think, was quite key for me when I was younger. I was always a later developer, so found that when I was quite successful at 10, 11, suddenly I started to hit a bit of a plateau when I didn't grow as much as everyone else, and comparing myself to other people was quite a difficult period of my sort of young swimming career. And I think having the right people around me to help me understand that, that is just the normal trajectory of life and different people have different developmental trajectories, I think was really important. At the end of the day, all you can control is yourself, and the only person worth focusing on is yourself. And sometimes it's the parent that has to try and help um, their child sort of realize that and maybe bring them back down to earth a little bit and ground them. And then for me, especially towards the latter end of my career, this trying to focus on processes rather than outcome is really important. I think if all you focus on from an early career all the way to your senior career is, am I going to win? What time am I going to go? That becomes the only way you start to define success. And as some of you may already realize, or you will probably realize as your kids get older, you do hit points of plateau in your career. It's absolutely natural, it will happen. But those are the moments where you need to start finding other definitions of success to keep moving forward and keep feeling like you're improving, even if the time on the board isn't getting quicker. Things like, am I underwater still improving? Is my stroke rate improving? Are my turns getting quicker? Is my technique better? Those kind of things are processes that, sometimes, if you're on the way home from a competition with your kid and they're really upset because they haven't got the time they want, maybe over time they'll start to sort of realize that those conversations around, but your technique looked fantastic. I've been, progressing on this way, trying to help them realize that there are other ways of defining success, which can be quite hard to realize when you're young because all you want is to see a better time or win a medal. And then the last few points here around trying to give, the young swimmers a more of an ownership over their journey. I think when you're that age, it's sometimes quite hard to know what to do, what's the right thing, and often it's your coach and your parents guiding you in that way. And um, just trying to help them be part of that journey and make the decisions for themselves so that they feel like they have ownership over their journey is really important. I think the earlier in your career that you learn that you are in control of the effort you put in, the sort of effort and energy you bring to a training session, it's all in your control. Um, the better you will be in kind of navigating that journey and having the motivation to keep going. Um, but yeah, I think that kind of sums up some of my earlier career and hopefully might be relevant to some of you parents there.
So I'm going to share with you some stats, and I don't share these to scare you. I shared it just to paint the reality of our sport and keeping things in, I hope, like context. It's always it's a challenge when we go on this sporting journey because often we can get a little bit sucked into wherever we are now, comparing it to other people, and we lose sight of that where we sit in the sporting world. Now, I did this talk in Asia over the summer, or a version of it. One of the examples I gave that was when you look at the global population of people that are able to swim and compare it to the competitive swimming population, by being a competitive swimmer, you are in the top 1% of the global swimming population just by being a competitive swimmer, which is obviously extremely special. And sometimes we can lose sight of that. But I just want you to take a look at some of the numbers that I've got up here. So just in England, there are 14 million public swimmers. Now, if you add all of the home nations together, there's 100,000 competitive swimmers. So your child is already in the under 1% of the domestic competitive population or population of swimming just by being a competitive swimmer. Less than 2.5% of those then make the home nation and British events. Okay, and that is absolutely crucial to understand that as you go on this journey. What your children do at all levels is special, but the numbers get very sharp very quickly. Okay. Um, Medaling wise, at the Summer Nationals this year, there were 612 at the Aquatics GB Next Gen Championships. Okay, which is obviously a very or relatively small number. Okay. Um, what I would also say is that as you get down to the next layers of the sports, there are quite big leaps at each layer. So if we go from the entry level, about 40 to 50% of kids, whether it's a county winter, January event, relay event, whatever it is, swim some form of county level event. 10% of competitive swimmers will go to a regional championships every year, approximately. 2.5% will go to a British event. Once you start getting into junior international teams, you are talking less than 10% of the 1% that will make a British summer championships. Okay, it's a very small number when you take into account all the different international teams that are out there, whether it's European Juniors, European Youth Olympics, an England youth team event, a Welsh or a Scottish team event, etc. So the reason I say that is because you're starting to get towards a really sharp end of the sport, and yet we're not even talking about the Olympics. I put the numbers up for the Olympics to give you some context that there are 33 swimmers every 4 years that make the British Olympic team. Since '97, when lottery funding came in and you could be a professional swimmer, 238 swimmers have swum for Great Britain. In that same time frame, 7,400 people have become millionaires through the national lottery. Okay, so you are 30, no, you are 41 times more likely to have won the lottery than have swum for Great Britain at the Olympics. Okay, and if we do that down to medals, I did these stats with Anna over the summer because obviously Anna in the unique position of being an Olympic gold medalist. I worked it out for astronauts. And for every one of Anna winning an Olympic gold medal for Great Britain in swimming, there are 8 astronauts. Okay, so I think we need to take that in context of how really hard it is to do most of the things on this list here. But when you start getting towards the sharp end, it is such a vast leap that we need to make sure that that again cannot be the only thing that's driving us forwards. It's not saying it's not inspiring, and it is possible. You know, Anna's on the call tonight with us. It is possible, it can be done, but it's really important that it is not the only thing that drives us. Many of your kids will do it because they love competing, or they love seeing their friends, or they love being challenged, or they love their fitness, what it's good for their physical and mental health. It helps them manage school. They're a naturally competitive kid, or for them, it just feels good. Whatever their reasons are, it's important that we don't pin our value or our net worth, to Anna's point a minute ago, on a single outcome. Because if we're looking at outcomes, statistically, as you get sharper and sharper and sharper, the odds are stacked against you. Okay. Team culture, Anna, do you just want to talk us a little bit through this? Because you've been on a number of teams, but also, I guess, the academic side of things when you were going through university, that culture that brought you back in to the sport in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, I think I guess the interesting thing about my journey is that I've been, well, we did work out, maybe roughly worked out how many coaches I've had over my career, and it's at least 13, and that's not even necessarily thinking about all the assistant coaches throughout the journey as well. And I think the culture that's created by coaches, by the athletes, by the parents within that culture is really, really important, not just to drive sort of success and performance, but just to create, well-rounded, happy individuals that love what they do and are supporting their teammates. And I think, I've had environments, particularly when I was, younger and potentially wasn't enjoying the sport very much, that maybe weren't that great. The priority was performance above all else. There wasn't much support there to kind of balance other areas of life. But then joining different sort of team cultures that I've realized have different priorities, I think is what brought me back into the sport, but also what helped me thrive through, moving to a university, navigating big changes in my life. And specifically when I sort of joined that smaller squad when I was younger, having a coach and people around me who understood where I was at, understood how best to support me, and understood what was important around swimming for me as a person, not just as an athlete, was what helped me take ownership for my journey. And obviously I spoke about ownership earlier, but for me to feel like I had control over what was happening in my life was obviously really, really important. But having a team that I felt I could be honest and open with and communicate well with, and had a two-way feedback system. So it wasn't just about me being told what I had to do or what was going well, what wasn't going well. It was about me also having input into what I felt would help me perform at my very best. And I think that isn't just created by coaches, it's also created by all of the swimmers within that culture and obviously the parents that surround that as well. And so I think everyone together, you are what kind of create that really positive, fun environment that is going to help our young swimmers, keep progressing and get better. And um, I think it's difficult, and we've spoken about comparisons sometimes, especially when you've got lots of swimmers training together every single day. Some are winning every single time. Some are struggling a bit more, might be hitting a bit of a plateau, and especially at the age where kids are going through different developmental milestones, those differences can be really big for some periods of time, and then you know it changes all the time, and so there has to be more at the pool, at training, that brings kids to the pool than just, I need to beat the person next to me, or I need to win this, or go a better time than that other person. There needs to be a really supportive culture that you're going to because you love swimming, you work really hard, and everyone is pulling for each other and pulling together. It has to be more than just that one outcome measure of what is successful.
So process versus outcome. I know Anna's touched on this a couple of times already, but we can have long-term ambition, the outcome in inverted commas that we're working towards, but daily intent is very much focused on the process. And that can be in everything from what you eat, how you sleep, how you think, how you train, what your skills are, etc., etc. It's built around what can we control. You can control the process, you cannot control the outcome. Okay, you could be a 100 breaststroker in Great Britain right now who is in the top 10 of all time British swimmers, and you may not win nationals because you're going up against Adam Peaty. Okay, you can't control that outcome. What you can control is how you approach your day to day every single day, and that is why we focus on the process. Language is vital because our language shapes what we focus on. So if I say to every child that I've ever coached, the only thing as a coach that is important to me is PBs, the only thing a swimmer will focus on is time. Okay, whereas actually, if I talk about all these other areas that we've talked about in terms of teammates, fun, the process, the journey, the experiences, etc., that language then tells a young person that that is what we value. Therefore, they will start focusing on it. Everyone's process is unique, so you can take ideas from people, you can guide, you can share ideas, you can take inspiration from different places, but ultimately everyone's process is unique. And that's a good thing because it will get the best out of them, not the best out of what was somebody else's. And I say an outcome must become more than a medal. It's not, as I say, I'm not trying to pull away from we're not motivated by medals or we don't want a medal. Kids like chasing after medals or a result or whatever it is, but it just needs to be more than that, not solely that. Okay, so hopefully that just expands on that a little bit just to bring it to life a little bit more. Oh, there we go. Now, the bigger picture, I've got a photo of Anna there, which she's going to talk us through in a second. I've talked about the fact that ultimately we have one eye on the now and one eye on the future. And what foundations are we laying? What are we going to give them now that they're going to be using when they're 20, 30, 40, etc.? Because ultimately, the coaches in the equation, parents, their teammates, the sports experiences that your young person goes through develops a young person, and they will go on to become an adult. So, what adult are we developing? So, Anna, can you just take us through the context of that photo, what you did after that photo was taken, and how some of the things that you've picked up on your swimming journey allowed you to have the skill set for what was a terrifying opportunity?
Yeah, so that picture was taken in the House of Parliament. That was an opportunity that, well, Kev just rang me up one day and was like, "Do you want to come speak in Parliament and advocate for, more money to be spent on PE and school sport and developing school sport partnerships to provide a better, more opportunities for young kids wanting to get into sport?" And I mean, obviously, it's something I'm very passionate about, love speaking about, more than happy to do it. Also, know it's Parliament and that's quite scary and um, not necessarily something I thought I would be in. It feels like when you're walking into that environment, it feels very serious and scared of saying the wrong thing. Um, but knowing it was for a very important, pot of money that hopefully would then be invested in school sports, getting more kids active, participating, and then hopefully getting involved in sports clubs was obviously very, very important to me. Now, I would say and definitely when I was younger, I am an introvert. I'm quite shy. Um, and so for me, probably 12, 13-year-old me thinking, would I ever be able to stand in Parliament and kind of get my point across to lots of politicians all sat around me, live streamed? Probably not. Um, I would say, regardless of medals, positions, times, the biggest thing that sport has given me is confidence. And for me now, I do quite a lot of public speaking. I can stand up in front of big rooms of people and quite confidently talk and articulate myself and get my point across. And 100% that's come from swimming. If you're young swimmers, you're standing on a block in front of people watching you swim and judging what you're doing. You have to have such a huge amount of confidence to be able to do that. And even if your kids are the people like me who are quite inwardly confident, maybe not outwardly confident, but that builds and that grows, and you start to learn how to use that in different ways and different ways of life. And this year for me, coming away from swimming and now, having to do job interviews and apply for jobs and put myself out there in a way that I haven't really had to do before because, I've always been almost protected by the sport. I've realized that all those skills that I've developed through swimming are exactly what I needed to be who I am today in a completely different area to just swimming up and down in a pool. So often you don't realize you're building those skills, but every single day, turning up to training, um, being organized with school, balancing life, everything just builds into who your kids are going to become in the future.
Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing screen there. We're going to open it up to within reason. Whatever questions you've got, the chat box is open, and because of your immense emoji skills earlier on, I know all your keyboards work. So we've got a little bit of time now, and please, and I don't mean this in a negative way, please be as selfish as possible here. Ask what it is you want to know. Ask what it is that's making you scratch your head. Ask what it is, hopefully, that we can extract from the experiences that we've had across, long and very different careers in this sport, to hopefully help you on this journey. The chat does have a private function, so if you don't want to put it in the group chat and want to send it to me directly, I can read those out anonymously. That is not an issue at all. But yeah, this is your chance. Barry, I don't know if you've got one to get us started. Obviously, you've worked with parents in a lot of different contexts over the years. What maybe as a question has made you scratch your head in terms of supporting parents across your journey?
Well, this is a question more as a parent as well, but I often find myself having conversations with my children on their various sports, and sometimes I have to really catch myself from trying to satisfy my drive and my um, curiosity and to really listening what they would need. But when I really step back and kind of listen to them, I can find that snippet that I can pass on to the coach, or I can find that little bit of information, what they might be feeling about their teammate said something or their coach has said something that's really sticking in their mind. And I think that, yeah, it's quite a hard skill to sometimes step back and how do we kind of, yeah, remove our emotion and our drive from conversations, if that
Yeah,
makes.
and I think, the panto face mentality of taking a breath and then putting on the mask that we need to in that situation. One of the things that I've often heard coaches on, like, national teams and things like that, certainly at Olympic level, will talk about the fact that the best coaches in the arena are the ones that can put on the mask that the swimmer needs at whatever moment in time, whenever they need it. And that, I would stretch that analogy out for parents, because inside we are feeling a whole range of emotions. As I've said, we've been on this journey with our young people for a very long time, and actually our facial expressions, our visual responses, and sometimes our words can betray us. So I think taking that breath and having a very standard response, not getting too carried away with the ups, not getting too carried away with the downs, and actually, great job, I love you, you did your best, regardless of the outcome, I think is an area that's really, really powerful. One thing I'd also say is that when it comes to reading swimmers, especially, and I'm mindful that we've got parents of teenagers on the call as well, is that there's this concept around what we call white space. So if I asked everyone today to take notes, you would probably pull out a line sheet of paper and you would take notes. But there would be things between the lines, the gaps, the white space that you can't write down, things that you feel, things that instinct tells you, but you can't quite put your finger on what it is. And as a parent, only you will know that. Now, wonderful example that most of you will be able to relate to. If your kids have had a good training session or a good meet and they get in the car, you will hear about it because they will not shut up. They will get in the car and it will just be a constant stream of that was brilliant, we had fun, we did this, etc., etc., etc. When that doesn't happen, the not hearing stuff, the no words, that tells you something as well. And as you go on this journey with your kids, you'll start to get a feeling of what's normal because, like Anna said, not everyone's a natural, external, confidently extrovert person. But actually, if your kids are constantly saying stuff in the car and then one week they say nothing in the car, or on the way from a meet where visually they've got a PB or they've got a medal and you go, but that wasn't the response that I usually get from them. Okay, that tells you a lot. And at that point, you're then positioned to make a judgment call. Do you ask another question? The journalist approach of ask a question and then ask another question and then ask another question? Or do you say nothing and actually let them volunteer information as and when they feel ready? And that might be around the dinner table on a Tuesday night, a few days after the competition or the training session. Okay, but sometimes we have to give them space to figure out how to share that information. And to start with, it might just be a gut feeling that you're like, I know there's something they want to say to me, so I just need to make them feel as psychologically safe as possible to create an environment where they're happy to share that information and give me that snippet that I can pass on to the coach or I can pass on to the teacher or can just inform what I'm going to say next to them. But there's no recipe, right? I'm sure we all have those moments where we're in meetings at work and we want to say something, but we don't say anything. And yet one of your colleagues goes, your face says you want to add something. And you suddenly go, oh, I thought I was covering it up well. Okay, our kids are learning how to do that. So yeah, that's one thing I would say on that point for sure. Anna, I don't know if there's any other things you would add to that.
Yeah, I was actually pretty much going to say that about, I know from my experience, my mum's the kind of parent that she will be the journalist approach. She'll ask lots of questions and really try and, she just wants to know I'm okay. But often that I would definitely retreat from that and be like, it's fine, I'm okay. No, like you wouldn't go deeper than that. And so I would say totally agree with what Kev said there about sometimes it's not a question, it's just reassurance in the moment. If you can just maybe tell something's off and then maybe give it space and then a little bit down the line, then, ask a question or start to see whether, they do start to open up or something comes out, because that was definitely me. And maybe that was being more of an introvert. I like to kind of keep my feelings bottled up quite a lot. So I wouldn't necessarily volunteer the information, but also if I felt like I was being interrogated about it, that would almost send me the other way. But yeah, again, it's every kid is different. Everyone processes emotions very differently. So, and I think also sometimes it's tempting to ask quite leading questions. You're expecting them to be happy with the results. You kind of ask a question in a way that requires a certain answer, but trying to ask very open questions that just leaves it to them to sort of say exactly how they're feeling rather than how you think they may be feeling in that situation.
Yeah, 100%. Leading questions is a big one, and there's plenty of resources out there in terms of that kind of support around questioning. But obviously, they're your kids, and only you know the way that you feel most appropriate to communicate with them. Mark's put a really good question into the chat around stuff from a prompts from a motivation or guidance for kids that feel like perhaps they're losing their way a little bit, and certainly from a what I often say with parents is I don't think there is a right or wrong way when it comes to how you communicate with your kids because like I said, every child is a case study of one and you'll all have your own philosophies and beliefs in this area. What I would say is there's nothing wrong with filling up your bookcase, your metaphorical bookcase if you like. So I think looking into lots of different examples, books, podcasts, athletes journeys, stories, whatever it is that fills that arsenal of tools up on your shelf, and at right time you will then have more tools to make a value call. But nobody can be in the same situation as you because, as I said, your child is a case study of one. I'm going to share on the screen quickly just our resource page for parents. So when you jump onto our homepage, aprace.club, right in the middle at the top, you'll see the tag resources. When you click on that, there is a parent resources section. And at the moment, there are 6 books on there. To Mark's point around tools and motivation, there's a couple of things on here. There's a book called The Long Win, and actually motivating people beyond the medal right here and now, or the time right here and now. It's written by an Olympic silver medalist who, for her first 2 Olympics, in inverted commas, failed because she was on the British rowing team and didn't come back from an Olympics with a medal, and that was deemed a failure. So she put a book together about it, and I think that's a really interesting insight into how we define winning and how we motivate people. Next one on there on the left-hand side is My Hidden Chimp. That's teaching young people how to navigate their inner voice. The good and the bad. You can do this, you can't do this, you'll want to do this, you don't want to do this. We all have that. We have that on a Monday morning when we've had a long weekend meet and we've got to go to work. Okay, all of those things are stuff that we learn to navigate, but this is a book that is designed for children. It's behind the author of The Chimp Paradox. Some of you will have read that book. That is a fantastic articulator, if you like, in terms of the messaging that we're trying to get across to kids on that. And then one more as a tool from a parent's point of view on the bottom left hand side is a book called Inventing Ourselves by Sarah Jane Blakemore. That is around the brain development of teenagers. Okay, so again, the questioning appropriate to where their brain development is. We don't have a mind reading brain scanner. Okay, but what we do have is a set of tools through books like this where actually we can go, right, as they enter this phase, here is some of the behaviors you can expect to see, and this is how, as a parent, you can consider managing it. Okay, so again, it's not swimming or sports specific, it's teenager specific, which I'm sure they're all going to get to at some point. So those are on our website. If you go slightly further down, there is some podcast resources as well, including the High Performance podcast, which Adam has been on a number of times. That is over 300 ex-athletes, businessmen, entrepreneurs, actors, singers, anyone you can name in the public space has probably been on that podcast. But a lot of them are parents, and they get asked questions about how do you manage that, or how do you deal with that, or what do you do when you don't want to do that, or your child doesn't want to do that. So again, it's a really good resource, but that's linked on that page as well. So there's just a few free to access resources there. Right. How did you manage?
Randomly at the start.
No, go on, Barry.
Just going to say, randomly at the start of this week, I listened to a Davina McCall and Steve Peters podcast, which was really good. And yeah, lots of useful information, even as an adult in that one as well. But he talked a little bit about the teenage side as well.
Steve's done about 4 or 5 really good podcasts. He's been on Davina McCall one. He's been on Diary of a CEO. He's been on High Performance. He's been on Simon Mundy's podcast, but he's very articulate. He was Ronnie O'Sullivan's sports psychiatrist. He also works with Sir Chris Hoy, and he's also worked with Adam, very much around managing mindset. And as we've seen with the way that Chris Hoy has dealt with the adversity he's been dealt at the moment, a lot of that is trainable, and it's something that is a direct result of how his work with Steve. So yeah, really interesting guy to check out, and yeah, done plenty of podcasts for sure. I can see something in here around managing studies, swimming and friends. I'll speak for myself and then I'll hand over to Anna, which will then lead into that next question that's come in. So for me, how did I manage studies, swimming and friends? My swimming circle was pretty vast, if I'm honest, both at a club level and at a university level because I swam at uni. Some of my core friends were my swimming friends. My wife is a swimmer. My best man was a swimmer. Most of my closest friends where I am now and have been for the last 15 years, I've met through swimming. So how did I balance it? I surrounded myself with those people. Ultimately, that makes my life a lot easier when the people understand. My school cohort is a group of about 5. Secondary school, we meet up twice a year. Now we have to do it in the middle of the day because they've all got children and they can't get childcare in the evenings to go out for dinner. But it's a very small group, but it is a group that is still my core group of friends. But I would say, in terms of how you manage it, it's so much context driven by where you're studying, how often you're studying in terms of is it full-time, part-time, or online? Is it something you do straight away at 18, certainly post school? I didn't go to uni till I was 21. I did my postgrad when I was 31. So I look at those things and go, well, I managed it because I was more mature and I had a clearer mindset on what I wanted to do. No one was setting my alarm when I was at university. That was me. So how did I manage it there? I think just approached it at a time when it was appropriate for me to manage those things. I'll be frank and honest because we're in like as safe a space as we can be. Through my A levels and GCSEs, I was awful. I took my entire study leave and I went to the beach and went surfing. I had a wonderful tan for my GCSEs, but certainly not the letters on the results sheet a few months later. For A levels, I pretty much dropped out after my first year, and came out with a B, a D, and a U. And I now have 2 degrees. Both degrees accepted me not looking at my GCSEs and A levels beyond English and maths at GCSE, because they said you want to come here, you want to work in this industry, and your swimming is what we're interested in. Because ultimately they could see that I was hardworking, committed, and knew what I wanted to do, and a result sheet won't tell them that. So that was how I managed it, and I certainly didn't manage it well when I was young, but I would say the skills that I took from swimming became my superpower as an adult now, and that's how I apply myself, not just in academics, but in everything that I do. Anna?
Yeah, so I guess from my perspective, I would always say education was a priority for me until pretty much until I graduated from Bath University with my degree. And I think part of that imbalance when I was younger was what led me to kind of leave the sporting environment I was in when I was sort of 12, 13. I didn't feel like the sport understood that education was the priority. And therefore, if I needed to miss sessions, prioritize my education and my exams, I would, but the sport didn't understand that. So for me, that was a definite imbalance, potentially lack of communication and understanding between everyone involved. But I don't think any child should have to sacrifice their education for the sake of a sport at sort of 12, 13. I guess when you start to get a little bit older into that sort of A levels, undergrad age, like Kev said, you start to make more of the decisions yourself. You start to become a bit more in control of what's happening. For me, I'm just the type of person that is very organized. If I'm not organized, I don't have things out get planned out. It just stresses me out. So that's just the kind of person I am. So that's just always been the way that I've dealt with it. I've planned ahead. I've mapped out what my, month looks like. When is everything due? When is it going to be particularly stressful? When do I have competitions? And then just kind of planned out when I'm going to do my work. And that's just kind of the way I operate. Obviously, not everyone is the same and has to find different ways of working it out. Biggest things for me at university, especially when swimming started to, get a bit more full on, was very good communication with lecturers around my commitments with swimming. There was particularly in 2018, which was the year I graduated, I had my dissertation due, I had my final year exams, and I was also at the Commonwealth Games in April. So pretty much came to a crunch point of everything. The exams couldn't be moved. That was when they had to be. But the dissertation I could get an extension on. So obviously had to have that planned way ahead. I couldn't just drop it on my lecturer to say, I need an extension on my dissertation. We had to put that into the planning from very early on. Luckily, my university were really great at kind of coordinating that and helping me with that. And then, like I've already said, just sort of planning ahead and organization, I think is really, really important. But you start to learn those lessons really early on as a swimmer. You need to, well, at least my mum always made me pack my bag, unpack my bag, get my snacks ready myself, fill up my water bottle. All of that was for me to organise. I had to be in charge of that. And if I forgot my snack, well, I was going to be pretty hungry. And that was just the way it was. So I think they're really good lessons to learn when you're pretty young. And that teaches you to kind of take ownership for everything that's going on in your life when you get to the point where you leave home and have to manage all of that and everything going on around it. In terms of the body image question, I'll touch on that. I guess the first thing I'd say is more education for everyone, boys and girls, around the changes you're going to go through. I mean, the work we're doing with Talbot Heath is great because, that's exactly what we're doing. We're all kind of speaking the same language and just opening up the conversation a lot more, which I think is definitely a starting point. I think for me, when I was younger, I didn't really have any clue about sort of developmental trajectories, the fact that I was a later developer, how that would impact my performance, how other people that were growing quicker and getting taller were probably going to be performing better than me at that point. That didn't mean that 4 years down the line I wasn't going to start overtaking them again. I think education around that, so girls kind of understand where they fit in that developmental trajectory. Um, and then also kind of coming back to the point around culture, creating a culture where, no one is judging anyone for the way they look or the way they're developing. It's just a supportive culture where everyone is going through changes with the way they look, the way their body feels in the water. Everyone is going through these changes. So how can we all just support each other and navigate these changes together? For some people, it's going to be developing really early. For some people, it's going to be developing later. And just how can we all just, be on the same page and just support each other rather than comparing and judging ourselves to each other. If that makes sense.
Okay, Sam's come in around the area of as a coach and swimmer, what would you say are the least helpful things that parents can do or say for their swimmer, whether it's intentional or not? So I'll speak on a couple of things here. I think sometimes we try and fix pain, and I mean emotional pain when it doesn't go well. You can't. And I know that's very hard to hear as a parent, but unless you have a time machine, there is no way to undo the race that didn't go well, the goal that wasn't hit, the disqualification, the ripped hat, the non selection, whatever it is. One of the most important things for young people is to learn how to work through disappointment. And that's a really hard process as a parent to allow your child to go through that because it's painful to watch. So, as hard as it is, it's really important within the bounds of what you deem acceptable that you let your young people know how to sit with it and understand that sometimes life doesn't go your way. That's an extremely challenging thing to do. So I would say that's one area. The other thing is for me is the response in the gallery. So when a race happens, kids touch the wall, they look at the clock and then they look at you. If in that moment you change your response based on what you would give them at any other point, based on what comes up on the scoreboard, your children learn that their value is tied to the scoreboard. Okay, so that for me is the biggest thing as a parent. If your kids can touch the wall and know unconditionally whatever comes up on the scoreboard, the reaction you give them, even if it's only a visual one, is positive and allows them to know that the unconditional love is still there, you'll sail, in inverted commas, through swimming parenting. As soon as kids tie their net worth to an outcome, you're on a slippery slope. Barry, I can see you want to dive in. Excuse the pun.
Yeah, it's just a point that I often have a heated conversation with my wife about is often, yeah, if you're not happy with a coach, his decisions at that time or the coach, I think try and refrain from having those conversations with your children because I think there's a big area where the child has got to develop that relationship with the coach and the coach has got to develop that relationship with the child and how to move forwards. And I'd much prefer a parent to say, oh, they were feeling like this rather than you having that conversation with the child. I hear, yeah, I have to cut in with my wife talking about my girls dancing coaches sometimes, and it's I can see that that child is then going to doubt the coach's intentions, and I think it's a good conversation to encourage the child to have that conversation with the coach and try and resolve something, but at the same time the parent then speaking to the coach um, around that as well.
Right time, right place is massive. There's no way around that. Right time, right place, and the right manner. I've seen the worst case of it. I've been sworn at verbally in front of a group of 12-year-olds by a parent in a gallery at a meet because they weren't happy that their 12-year-old child had been beaten by another 12-year-old child in my squad who they'd always beat. Now, right or wrong, how that was communicated to me with lots of effing and blinding from a gallery was perhaps not the most productive way to get the message across to me or their children. What that did do is create an extremely uncomfortable atmosphere in the squad for that child, who then had to go in the changing rooms and deal with the fallout of that. So I think it's important to understand that that ecosystem, that triangle between swimmer, parent, and coach, is volatile because your kids are changing. Coaches are going to have a long-term viewpoint from a coaching point of view, and parents, your love and your center of your universe is based around the child. Okay, so it's never going to be perfect because we all have slightly different viewpoints we're coming from, but we all want the same thing: great experience and get the best from the journey. Okay, how we get there, we might all have different viewpoints, but that's no different to when you're in the car and someone says, no, take a left there. And you go, yeah, but I want to go right. And someone says, no, go straight on, it'll be fine. Okay, we are still heading to the same destination, even if we have different viewpoints, but we need to do that respectfully and understand that we are all trying to help the individual, which is the swimmer. Right, a question for Anna around the multiple sports. How did you balance your swimming commitments with other sports that you're also committed to / enjoying? And if we just touch upon the bit that led up to you having to make that decision to step away from swimming at the age of 13.
Yeah, so I I guess I was always an incredibly just sporty, all round sporty child, and so were my family. That's kind of the environment I grew up in. So I was always encouraged to just join every single club. So when I was younger, I joined gymnastics, ballet, obviously swimming, running, just tried loads of different sports and usually loved all of them. Obviously, when swimming became more serious when I was younger, the expectation was that I had to stop all my other sports because there was just not enough time in the week to try and balance them all. So ultimately, I actually quit all my other sports to just do swimming. Now, obviously, that didn't work out at that time because it was too much too soon with just swimming, and ultimately decided to step back from swimming. And actually, I think part of that was resenting swimming for making me stop all those other sports that I really enjoyed. So then, pretty much as soon as I'd kind of stepped away from that squad that I was swimming in, I instantly joined a gymnastics club, joined a trampolining club, joined the cheerleading club, joined a running club, still swam a couple of times a week, mainly for fitness, but I did school's biathlon, so I did the swim run competitions. And I was probably just as busy, just as active as I had been doing 7 sessions in the pool. Um, but because I loved the variety and I was getting to do all the sports I loved, it never felt like a burden or too intense or anything like that. And I mean, some days I'd go from running club, which was 5 till 6 after school, and then my mum would pick me up. I'd be red in the face and sweating, and she'd drive me straight to cheerleading. I'd eat my dinner in the car, and then I'd do an hour of cheerleading. And that was probably more intense than going to the pool and doing 2 hours of swimming, but it didn't feel that way to me because I absolutely loved what I was doing. And I was at a conference recently in Saudi actually, and something someone said just really got me thinking about. Someone asked a question about recovery, how to help kids recover more when they're doing a sport when they're younger. And they said do different sports because you don't need recovery in the sense of like ice baths or compression boots or anything like that. You need recovery in terms of working different muscles, working different energy systems, doing different sports, using your brain differently. That's how kids need to recover, not swimming up and down the pool and that's it. I mean, if that's what they love and that's all they want to do, absolutely go ahead. But for the kids that love doing other sports, there are real benefits to your long-term swimming career for having multiple sports. And there are definitely ways to make it work. And I think, for me, had the cardiovascular fitness from running, swimming, flexibility from gymnastics, agility, great proprioception in terms of where my body moved in space from all these other sports. And I think all of that, when I ultimately came back to the sport, took it more seriously, hugely benefited me. And so I would always encourage kids if they like multiple sports to try and do them, until the point when they're ready to take one more seriously.
Okay, there's no more questions in the chat. Barry, I don't know if there's anything you want us to either share quickly before we wrap up, or whether there's anything else anyone wants to touch upon before we call it a night.
I'll just jump in with one last question.
Please do.
So yeah, again, putting in myself in parent shoes, and you can see your child has potential, but perhaps doesn't have the drive at the moment, or you're not sure if they'll ever get the drive. How should we support the child?
I don't know if I'll have a different view on this to Anna. I have two things that I think of when you share that. The first one is that it's very easy to impart our own ambitions on someone else. And what happens is over time, the young person then believes that is our journey, not their journey. That's the first thing. Like you see it all the time in, say, a football one where someone's living their dreams through their child. So that can edge towards that if we start going down that route. The second thing, and it was an experience I had pretty early on in my full-time coaching career, I went to a corporate event because we were one of the local clubs working with a corporate partner, and the keynote speaker was Sir Steve Redgrave, and he came round all the teams that were there at the end, and he saw the Olympic rings on our club stuff because we had kids going to the Olympics. And he stopped, obviously, he's interested, like finding out about us and what we did. And I got into a conversation with him about swimming and sporting parenting. And he had two kids. One of them played rugby to a professional level. The other one was a world-class skier, but did not have a competitive bone in her body. And he looked at me, and I asked him, I was like, "How do you manage that?" Pretty much the same question, because I said, "You must. I've read books about you. You're the most competitive person on the planet." And he looked at me and he went, "But it's her journey, not mine." And that's it. That was it. Like to hear that from someone like him, who is captain competitive, and his daughter just didn't have that competitive bone. He's like, it's not my place. So it's hard, but ultimately it's their journey. And the funny thing is, if you don't put the pressure on, they will get more from the sport because they'll stay in it long enough, and you can still compete and enjoy it even if you're not that competitive. I'm racing at the British Masters next week. I'm probably going to drown and come quite far down the rankings, but I'm looking forward to it. Okay, because my competitive bone at the moment has been thrown into AP race, not into my own training and swimming. Doesn't mean I still don't want to race. So yeah, I think it's really important to tread that line carefully because if you don't, it ultimately is a fast track to them leaving the sport. Anna, I don't know if you've got a different view on that.
No, I mean, I pretty much agree with everything you said there. I mean, it has to come from them. And, I talk a lot about ownership around at the end of the day, they're the ones making the decisions to, the effort that they're putting into training and how much they want to work hard to achieve certain goals. And if it isn't there and it's someone else forcing them to kind of turn up to training and keep grinding through and working hard, they're probably never going to love the sport to the point where they will stay in it and progress to a higher level. Um, Sometimes it ebbs and flows. So like you can see a lot of potential, but sometimes the motivation's up here and sometimes it's down here. And maybe you can see, if they find that right balance, that they can stay in the sport and be really successful. And in those situations, it's trying to manage and balance that, trying not to push too hard to the point where they're going to break and just leave the sport, but use those moments when they're really motivated and swimming well and feeling successful to kind of capitalize on that and make them feel really good in what they're doing. And in the moments when they're maybe slightly less motivated, just kind of trying to understand why and what it is that they need to make it more enjoyable. And yeah, ultimately trying to just keep them in the sport, enjoying the sport to the point where then they can start making more decisions and taking ownership for whether they want to take it to the next level. Because sometimes it doesn't all click into place until you're sort of 14, 15, when you're like, actually, I want to do this. This is what I want to do for life. And sometimes it's managing those years before that point to help them figure out whether that is what they want or whether they just, like doing the sport for fitness or um, to see friends. And it's just trying to figure out what is the reason that they turn up for training and how can you make it more enjoyable.
Fantastic. I've just seen one more question sneaked in. Understand the importance of nutrition. Two things. Number one, education needs to be something that's part of the norm. So you don't just do a 1 hour talk on nutrition and expect it's going to land with kids because it won't. It needs to be something that's drip fed into them regularly because they eat 3 times a day. Therefore, if they do something and tweak it slightly, it's going to become a habit quite quickly. The second thing is that parents and nutrition, and I say this quite widely, parents and most topics, kids do not want to hear that from you because you're their parents. And it's not a negative on parents, it's the way that kids are in many ways. So sometimes finding a different vessel to get that messaging in. In the parent slides, in the parent resources, we've got a link to a YouTube video where we recorded a sports nutritionist, Adam, Anna's back in the day, Richard, just talking about what are the common things that you'd say as a parent towards your swimmer on race day, but coming from someone else. We've recorded it all and it's all on YouTube to watch. So there's some useful stuff there. But yeah, for me with nutrition, it's education, drip feeding it in, making it become a habit and regularly part of what they do, but also utilizing different methodologies to get it to them, because sometimes they just don't want to hear it. Anna, any thoughts on nutrition to wrap us up?
Yeah, I guess trying to make it fun in terms of maybe when you're packing their lunch bag for a competition, involving them in the decisions as to what goes in, and maybe, asking them for why they want to put that in, and maybe if there's an alternative, what could be a better option. Um, Things like overnight oats are quite a fun one because you can use loads of different recipes. You can make like, you know, sticky toffee pudding overnight oats, carrot cake overnight oats, like maybe just using it as a bit of a fun recipe type opportunity where they can kind of get involved in the making process. And then that might kind of start to switch on some interest in nutrition and, why you eat certain foods. But like Kev says, I think, and I can definitely agree with that. If my mum told me, you know, eat this because it's this, I'd be like, I wouldn't believe her. But if someone else told me the exact same thing, I probably would. So um, sometimes it's just finding other ways of getting them engaged and just building that up over time.
Wonderful. Well, everyone on the call and for the questions, thank you so much for such a broad range of questions. It's always nice to be challenged and hear things from different angles. I know Anna's been doing some wonderful talks with the students at the school, and this is not by any means the end point. This is only going to grow and develop in terms of what we're going to do. A huge thank you for Barry for sorting all this out and actually opening the conversation with us in the first place. For me, like I've known Barry for a very long time in his different roles over the years, and I think having a coach that looks at the needs of the athlete and puts them and their support system parents above everything else, you're in a really good place. So yeah, really grateful, Barry, for inviting us in to talk tonight, and obviously Anna, thank you for sharing some time with us.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thanks
just
for
on
having me.
behalf of a huge thank you as well, because I think I was really pleased with how we'd set the program up, but now started to develop the culture and starting to look at where we want to get to. I think you've been a massive inspiration and part of that. So yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. All right. Well,
Thank you.
I'll send across the recordings, the notes, and any other bits tomorrow to be circulated. And if any of you want to watch it back, I'll also put our direct email. So if you've got any questions and you've got any more things to follow up on, please reach out. All our resources are built on the feedback we get. So if you've got lots of questions, please just keep them coming, and I'll be sure to make it down to the school at some point this season. But beyond that, thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. And again, thank you so much for your time.